The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Dodge City erupted in chaos as gunfire shattered the pre-dawn silence. Elias Eli Walker pressed his back against a rotting wooden beam, his weathered Colt .45 smoking in his calloused hand. Blood trickled from a graze on his temple, mixing with the dust and sweat that caked his face. "Give it up, Walker." The voice echoed through the cavernous space, cold and familiar. "You're outnumbered and outgunned." Eli's steel-gray eyes swept the shadows, counting muzzle flashes. 4 men, maybe 5. His jaw tightened as he recognized the voice. Jed Murphy, the cattle baron who'd been pulling strings in Dodge City like a puppet master for years. But this wasn't about cattle or territory. This was about a 7-year-old girl named Clara Harper and the desperate woman who'd begged him for help 3 days ago. "Where is she, Murphy?" Eli called out, his voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Where's the girl?" A harsh laugh bounced off the warehouse walls. "Closer than you think, old friend, but not close enough for you to save her." Eli's heart hammered against his ribs. Somewhere in this maze of crates and shadows, Clara Harper was counting on him, a broken-down former lawman who'd sworn off heroics years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. The town's most notorious loner, fighting for someone else's child when he'd failed to save his own. A board creaked to his left. Eli spun, firing twice into the darkness. A cry of pain confirmed his aim, but return fire forced him deeper into the warehouse. His ammunition was running low, and dawn was still hours away. "You always were too stubborn for your own good." Murphy's voice drifted closer. "Should have minded your own business, Eli. Should have stayed in whatever hole you crawled out of." Eli's mind raced back to 3 days ago, when a desperate woman with haunted eyes had approached him outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. Evelyn Harper, widow, mother, and the only person in Dodge City brave enough to ask the town pariah for help. "Please," she had whispered, her voice breaking. "Everyone else has given up. They say she's just another runaway, but I know something terrible has happened. You're the only one who might listen." He'd wanted to walk away, should have walked away. But something in her eyes, the same desperate hope he'd once seen in his own wife's face, had stopped him cold. Now, crouched in this death trap with bullets flying overhead, Eli wondered if his decision to help had sealed all their fates. A small sound caught his attention, a whimper, barely audible above the chaos. His blood ran cold. Clara. She was here, somewhere in this warehouse, probably terrified beyond measure. "I hear her, too," Murphy called out, as if reading his thoughts. "Sweet little thing. Reminds me of another child, doesn't she, Eli? One you couldn't save, either." The words hit like physical blows. Murphy knew. Somehow the bastard knew about Sarah, about the daughter Eli had lost 5 years ago. The tragedy that had driven him from his badge and into the bottle. "That's right," Murphy continued, his voice dripping with malice. "I know all about Sheriff Eli Walker's greatest failure. How you let your own little girl die while you were too drunk to protect her." Eli's vision blurred with rage and grief. His finger tightened on the trigger, but he forced himself to stay focused. This wasn't about the past. This was about Clara. About giving one mother the chance he'd failed to give his own wife. Another whimper. Closer this time. Eli followed the sound, moving like a ghost through the shadows. Years of tracking outlaws and reading sign hadn't abandoned him, even if everything else had. He found her in a corner, bound and gagged but alive. Clara Harper's wide brown eyes met his through the darkness, filled with terror but also something else. Hope. She'd heard the stories about the loner cowboy, probably seen him around town. Now he was her only chance. "It's all right, little one," Eli whispered, cutting her bonds with his knife. "I'm going to get you out of here." Clara's small hand gripped his with surprising strength. "My mama," she whispered. "Is my mama safe?" The question hit him harder than Murphy's bullets. Here was a child, kidnapped and terrified, and her first concern was for her mother. It reminded him painfully of his own Sarah, who'd always worried about others before herself. "She's safe," he lied, praying it was true. "She's waiting for you." Footsteps approached their hiding spot. Eli positioned himself between Clara and the sound, his gun ready. But as a figure emerged from the shadows, he froze. It wasn't one of Murphy's men. It was Evelyn Harper herself, clutching a shotgun with shaking hands, her face streaked with tears and determination. "I couldn't wait," she gasped. "I had to come. I had to help." "How did you—" Eli began, but gunfire erupted around them, cutting off his words. "Touching reunion," Murphy's voice boomed. "But it ends here. All of you." As bullets splintered the wood around them, Eli realized the terrible truth. This wasn't a random kidnapping. This was a trap, one that had been years in the making. Murphy hadn't just taken Clara to hurt a desperate mother. He'd taken her to draw out Eli Walker, to finish something that had started long before any of them had arrived in Dodge City. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of their ragged breathing. Clara pressed against her mother while Evelyn's eyes met Eli's in the darkness. In that moment, he saw the same question that had been haunting him for 3 days. How had a simple plea for help led them to this moment of life and death? "Time to end this, Walker," Murphy called out. "Time to pay for what you did in Tombstone." Tombstone. The word hit Eli like a physical blow. So that's what this was about. Not Dodge City politics or cattle wars, but something that had happened 5 years ago in Arizona territory. Something Eli had tried desperately to forget. As Murphy's men closed in from all sides, Eli made a decision that would change everything. He handed his gun to Evelyn, kissed Clara's forehead, and stepped out into the open. "You want me, Murphy?" he called out. "Here I am. Let them go and we'll finish this like men." The laughter that echoed through the warehouse was cold and merciless. "Oh, we'll finish it all right, but not the way you think." And as the first light of dawn crept through the warehouse windows, Eli Walker realized that everything he thought he knew about Clara Harper's kidnapping and about his own past was about to be turned upside down. 3 days earlier, a desperate mother approached the most unlikely hero in Dodge City. But how did a simple plea for help lead to a deadly confrontation in an abandoned warehouse? The answers lie in the shadows of the past, where secrets have been buried and debts remain unpaid. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick, and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story." 3 days earlier, the Silver Dollar Saloon buzzed with the usual evening crowd of cowboys, gamblers, and drifters, but Eli Walker sat alone at the far end of the bar, nursing his third whiskey of the night. The amber liquid burned his throat, but it couldn't burn away the memories that haunted him. Memories of a badge he'd once worn with pride, of a family he'd failed to protect, of a life that had crumbled like dust in his hands. "Another?" asked Tom Bradley, the bartender, his weathered face showing concern that Eli neither wanted nor deserved. "Keep 'em coming," Eli muttered, not bothering to look up from his glass. The saloon doors swung open, letting in a gust of Kansas wind and the sound of horses' hooves on the dusty main street. Eli didn't turn around. He'd learned long ago that most trouble announced itself loudly. But this newcomer moved quietly, almost hesitantly, and something about the soft footsteps made him glance over his shoulder. A woman stood just inside the doorway, clearly out of place among the rough crowd. She was maybe 30, with auburn hair pulled back severely and clothes that had seen better days. But it was her eyes that caught Eli's attention. Dark brown, filled with a desperation he recognized all too well. She scanned the room nervously before her gaze settled on him. For a moment, their eyes met across the smoky interior, and Eli saw something that made his chest tighten. She knew who he was. More importantly, she was looking at him like he might be her salvation. That was a mistake he'd seen too many people make. The woman approached slowly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Mr. Walker?" Eli turned back to his drink. "Depends who's asking. My name is Evelyn Harper." Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. I need your help. I don't help people anymore, Mrs. Harper. Eli's voice was flat, final. Find yourself a lawman. I tried. The words came out in a rush. Sheriff Collins says there's nothing he can do. Says children run away all the time, especially when times are hard. Something in her tone made Eli pause, his glass halfway to his lips. Children? Evelyn's composure cracked slightly. My daughter, Clara. She's 7 years old and she's been missing for 2 days. Eli set down his glass harder than necessary. Lady, I'm not a lawman anymore. Haven't been for 5 years. You want help finding a runaway kid? Talk to Collins again. She didn't run away. Evelyn's voice turned fierce, protective. Clara would never leave me, not willingly. Something's happened to her, something terrible, and everyone in this town is too afraid or too bought off to care. The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Eli finally turned to face her fully, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook despite her determined stance. This wasn't just a worried mother. This was a woman on the edge of breaking. What makes you think she didn't run away? He asked, hating himself for the question. Evelyn reached into her worn coat and pulled out a small cloth doll, its fabric faded but clearly well-loved. She never goes anywhere without Molly. Found this in the alley behind our boarding house, torn and dirty. Clara would die before she'd leave Molly behind. Eli stared at the doll, and for a moment, he was 5 years ago in Tombstone, holding his own daughter's favorite toy while his world collapsed around him. He pushed the memory away with practiced force. Could have dropped it running, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. There's more. Evelyn sat down uninvited on the stool next to him. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house said she saw a man watching our window the night before Clara disappeared. Big man, well-dressed. When she called out to him, he tipped his hat and walked away. Lot of well-dressed men in Dodge City. Not many who know which window belongs to a widow and her daughter. Evelyn's eyes flashed. And not many who'd have reason to watch us. We don't have money, don't have connections. We're nobody special. Eli studied her face, noting the intelligence behind the desperation. So why come to me? Why not keep pushing the sheriff? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her fingers worrying the doll's worn fabric. Because I heard the stories about Sheriff Eli Walker, the man who cleaned up Tombstone, the man who never gave up on a case, no matter how hopeless it seemed. That man's dead, Eli said harshly. Died 5 years ago along with everything else that mattered. I don't believe that. Evelyn's voice was soft but certain. A man doesn't change that much, not in his heart. Eli laughed bitterly. Lady, you don't know what you're talking about. That badge-wearing hero you heard about? He was a drunk who let his own family down when they needed him most. You want to trust your daughter's life to that? Instead of backing down, Evelyn leaned closer. What happened to your family, Mr. Walker? The question hit like a physical blow. Eli's hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles went white. That's none of your damn business. Maybe not, but I know loss when I see it. I know what it looks like when someone's carrying guilt that's eating them alive. Her voice gentled. I lost my husband 2 years ago. Consumption. Watched him waste away while I could do nothing but hold his hand and lie about how everything would be all right. Eli met her eyes, seeing a pain that matched his own. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Harper, but that doesn't change anything. Doesn't it? Evelyn stood up, her composure cracking further. My little girl is out there somewhere, probably scared and crying for her mama, and the only man in this town with the skills to find her is sitting in a saloon drowning in whiskey and self-pity. The words stung because they were true. Eli turned away, but Evelyn wasn't finished. You want to know what I think happened to your family? I think you failed them somehow, and now you're so afraid of failing again that you won't even try to help. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Walker. Not trying is the same as failing. At least if you try and fail, you can live with knowing you did everything you could. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of piano music from the saloon's back room. Eli stared into his whiskey, seeing not amber liquid, but the face of his daughter Sarah, forever frozen at 6 years old. Please, Evelyn whispered, and the word carried all the weight of a mother's breaking heart. I'll pay you whatever I can. I'll work for you, cook for you, anything. Just please help me find my little girl." Eli closed his eyes, fighting a battle he'd been losing for 5 years. Every instinct told him to walk away, to protect himself from the inevitable disappointment and pain. But when he opened his eyes and saw Evelyn Harper's face, saw the same desperate hope his own wife had worn in those final days, he knew he was already lost. "I don't want your money," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Evelyn's face lit up with fragile hope. "Then you'll help?" Eli drained his glass and stood up, his decision made despite every warning voice in his head. "I'll look into it, but I'm not making any promises, and I'm not your hero. I'm just a broken-down drunk who might know which rocks to look under. That's more than anyone else has offered." Tears glistened in Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you." As they walked toward the saloon doors, Eli caught sight of their reflection in the mirror behind the bar, a desperate woman and a reluctant man, bound together by circumstances neither had chosen. He had no way of knowing that this moment would set in motion events that would drag them both into the darkest corners of Dodge City's secrets. "Tell me about the night she disappeared," he said, as they stepped into the cool evening air. "Everything you remember, no matter how small." And as Evelyn began to speak, painting a picture of a normal evening that had turned into every parent's nightmare, Eli Walker felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years: purpose. It scared him more than any gunfight ever had, because this time, failure wasn't just about his own guilt and pain. This time, a little girl's life hung in the balance, and Eli knew that if he failed again, it would destroy not just him, but the brave woman walking beside him. The hunt for Clara Harper was about to begin, and neither Eli nor Evelyn had any idea how deep and dark the trail would lead them. As Eli Walker reluctantly agrees to help find Clara Harper, neither he nor Evelyn realize they're walking into a web of deception that stretches back years. But some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some debts demand to be paid in blood. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dodge City's main street as Eli Walker stood outside the Harper boarding house, studying the scene with the practiced eye of a former lawman. 2 days of investigation had yielded precious little. A few witnesses who'd seen Clara playing in the street, a shopkeeper who remembered her buying penny candy, and the mysterious well-dressed man Mrs. Patterson had spotted watching their window. Evelyn emerged from the boarding house, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. She'd barely slept since Clara's disappearance, and it showed in every line of her body. "Anything new?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Eli shook his head grimly. "Trail's cold as winter stone. Whoever took her knew what they were doing." He paused, studying her face. "You sure there's nothing you're not telling me? No enemies, no debts, no reason someone might target you?" Evelyn's hesitation was barely perceptible, but Eli caught it. Years of reading people had taught him to spot the small tells that revealed hidden truths. "Mrs. Harper," he said gently but firmly, "if you want me to find your daughter, I need to know everything." She looked away, her hands twisting the fabric of her skirt. There might be something, but it's from before, from when my husband was alive. Tell me." Evelyn glanced around nervously, then motioned for him to follow her into the boarding house's small parlor. Once they were alone, she closed the door and turned to face him. "My husband, Thomas, he wasn't just a shopkeeper like I told everyone. Before we came to Kansas, he worked for the railroad in Arizona Territory. There was trouble." Eli's blood chilled. Arizona Territory. Tombstone. The place where his own life had fallen apart. "What kind of trouble?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew. "Thomas discovered that someone was skimming money from the railroad payroll, thousands of dollars over several months. When he reported it, they told him to keep quiet, that they'd handle it internally." Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. But Thomas couldn't let it go. He had evidence, documents, names, amounts. He was going to take it to the territorial authorities. "What happened?" "Someone broke into our house one night. They ransacked everything, looking for the documents. Thomas had hidden them, but—" She shuddered. "They threatened me. Threatened to hurt me if Thomas didn't hand over the evidence and disappear. Eli felt the pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. So you came to Kansas. Thomas gave them fake documents, told them he'd destroyed the real ones. We left Arizona the next day, changed our name from Harrison to Harper, and tried to start over. Tears began to flow down her cheeks. But Thomas kept the real evidence. Said someday, when it was safe, he'd make sure justice was done. Where are those documents now? Evelyn walked to a small writing desk and pulled out a hidden drawer. From it, she withdrew a leather portfolio, worn and water-stained. Thomas made me promise to keep them safe. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should find someone trustworthy and make sure the truth came out. Eli opened the portfolio with trembling hands. Inside were railroad documents, payroll records, and correspondence, all bearing the letterhead of the Tombstone and Southern Railroad. But it was the names on the documents that made his blood run cold. Jed Murphy. The same Jed Murphy who now owned half the cattle ranches around Dodge City. Jesus, Eli breathed, sinking into a chair. You know him? Evelyn asked, seeing his reaction. Eli stared at the documents, his mind racing back 5 years to a night in Tombstone that had changed everything. Yeah, I know him. And now I know why Clara was taken. I don't understand. Eli looked up at her, his face grim. Murphy didn't just steal from the railroad, Mrs. Harper, he killed for it. And I was the sheriff who was supposed to stop him. The story came pouring out of him then, 5 years of buried guilt and pain finally finding voice. He told her about the night his deputy had discovered Murphy's operation, about the ambush that had left 3 good men dead, about how Murphy had escaped justice because Eli had been too drunk to lead the pursuit properly. My daughter Sarah was sick that night, he said, his voice breaking. Fever, chills. My wife begged me to stay home, but I insisted on going to the saloon instead. Said I needed to think, needed to plan our next move. But really, I just wanted to drink away the pressure. Evelyn listened in silence, her hand covering her mouth in horror. While I was getting drunk, Murphy's men attacked our house. They were looking for evidence, just like they did to you. But Sarah was there, and she was sick. And when she started crying, Eli's voice failed him completely. Oh, God, Evelyn whispered. They killed her to keep her quiet. A 6-year-old girl murdered because her father was too much of a drunk to protect her. Eli wiped his eyes roughly. My wife died of grief 6 months later, and Murphy disappeared into the wind with enough stolen money to buy himself a new life. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Finally, Evelyn spoke. That's why you left Tombstone. Why you gave up your badge. I didn't deserve to wear it. Still don't. Eli stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. And now, Murphy's here in Dodge City, living like a king while good people suffer. He must have found out about those documents, figured out that you and your husband were the ones who could destroy him. But Thomas is dead. The threat died with him. Not if you still have the evidence. Eli turned back to her. Murphy can't take the chance that you might someday find the courage to use those documents. So he took Clara to force your hand. Evelyn's face went white. You think he'll trade her for the documents? Maybe. Or maybe he plans to kill all of you to make sure his secrets stay buried. Eli's voice was hard as iron. Either way, we're going to find him and get Clara back. How? You said yourself the trail is cold. Eli was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his eyes hardened with determination. Because I know Murphy. I know how he thinks, how he operates. And I know he's too arrogant to hide completely. He'll have Clara somewhere close. Somewhere he can control the situation. Where? There's an old warehouse district on the edge of town. Abandoned buildings, perfect for hiding someone. If I were Murphy, that's where I'd go. Eli checked his gun, making sure it was loaded. But first, we need to make sure you're safe. I'm coming with you. Like hell you are. This is going to be dangerous, and she's my daughter. Evelyn's voice cracked with emotion. I won't sit here doing nothing while she's out there scared and alone. I can't. Eli saw the determination in her eyes, the same fierce protectiveness he'd once felt for his own family. He knew there was no talking her out of it. All right, he said finally, but you do exactly what I say when I say it. No arguments, no hesitation. Clara's life might depend on it. Evelyn nodded, her jaw set with resolve. What do we do first? We get you a gun and teach you how to use it. Then we go hunting. As they prepared to leave the boarding house, neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street. A well-dressed man with cold eyes and a cruel smile. Jed Murphy had been waiting for this moment for 5 years, and now his patience was about to be rewarded. The game was finally afoot, and this time Murphy intended to win permanently. But as Eli Walker strapped on his gun belt for the first time in months, something had changed in the broken-down former sheriff. The guilt and self-pity were still there, but they'd been joined by something else. A burning need for redemption that could only be satisfied by saving Clara Harper and finally bringing Jed Murphy to justice. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, Eli Walker wouldn't let alcohol or fear stop him from doing what was right. Too much depended on it. Not just Clara's life, but his own soul. As they stepped out into the afternoon sun, Evelyn clutching a shotgun with shaking hands, Eli felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. 5 years ago, he'd failed his family and let a killer escape. Now, fate had given him a chance to make things right. He wouldn't waste it. With Clara's life hanging in the balance and old enemies closing in, Eli Walker must confront the demons of his past to save an innocent child. But Jed Murphy has been planning this confrontation for 5 years, and he holds all the cards. Or does he? The abandoned warehouse loomed before them in the pre-dawn darkness, its broken windows like dead eyes staring out at the Kansas prairie. Eli crouched behind a pile of discarded lumber. Evelyn beside him, clutching the shotgun he'd taught her to use just hours before. Her hands had stopped shaking, replaced by the steady determination of a mother fighting for her child. "Remember what I told you," Eli whispered. "Stay behind me, watch for my signals, and don't hesitate to shoot if someone threatens Clara." Evelyn nodded, her eyes fixed on the warehouse. "She's in there. I can feel it." Eli studied the building's layout, noting the multiple entrances and the strategic positioning of Murphy's men. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a carefully planned trap, designed to draw him in and finish what had started 5 years ago in Tombstone. "Murphy!" Eli called out, his voice echoing across the empty lot. "I know you're in there! Let's talk!" The response came in the form of a rifle shot that splintered the wood inches from his head. Eli pushed Evelyn down as more gunfire erupted from the warehouse windows. "Talking time's over, Walker," Murphy's voice boomed from inside. "You cost me everything in Tombstone. Now it's time to settle the debt. The only debt here is the one you owe to every person you've hurt." Eli returned fire, his shots precise and measured. "Starting with my daughter. Your daughter was just the beginning." Murphy laughed coldly. "You should have stayed drunk and forgotten, Eli. Should have let sleeping dogs lie." Eli's jaw tightened. "Where's Clara, Murphy? She's got nothing to do with this." "She's got everything to do with this. Her mother's been carrying evidence that could hang me, and you're the only lawman fool enough to believe her story." The admission hit Eli like a physical blow. Murphy had just confessed to multiple crimes, including Sarah's murder, in front of a witness. If they survived this, justice would finally be served. "Mama!" A small voice cried out from inside the warehouse, weak but unmistakably Clara's. Evelyn started to rise, but Eli held her back. "Not yet. He's trying to draw us in. But she's calling for me. I know. But if we go in there unprepared, we'll all die, and Clara will be lost forever." Eli studied the warehouse again, his tactical mind working through possibilities. Then he noticed something. A section of the roof had partially collapsed, creating an opening large enough for a man to slip through. "I'm going around back," he told Evelyn. "Give me 10 minutes, then start shooting at the front windows. Don't try to hit anyone, just keep them distracted." "What if something goes wrong?" Eli met her eyes, seeing his own fear reflected there. "Then you take Clara and run. Don't look back, don't try to help me, just get her to safety." Before Evelyn could protest, Eli was moving, using the scattered debris as cover while he circled toward the rear of the building. Years of tracking outlaws had taught him to move silently, and despite the alcohol and self-doubt that had plagued him, those skills remained sharp. The back of the warehouse was darker, more secluded. Eli found a broken door hanging on rusted hinges and slipped inside, his gun drawn and ready. The interior was a maze of crates and machinery, perfect for an ambush but also providing cover for his approach. He could hear voices ahead, Murphy giving orders to his men, positioning them for the final confrontation. But there was another sound, too, one that made his heart race, the soft whimpering of a frightened child. Following the sound, Eli crept deeper into the warehouse until he found her. Clara Harper sat tied to a wooden chair in a small office, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes alert and brave. When she saw him, her face lit up with hope. "You came," she whispered as he cut her bonds. "I promised your mama I would," Eli replied, lifting her into his arms. "Can you walk?" Clara nodded, though her legs were shaky from being tied up for so long. "The bad man said you were coming. He seemed happy about it." "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to get you out of here." As they moved toward the rear exit, gunfire erupted from the front of the building. Evelyn had started her distraction right on schedule, but their escape route was blocked. Two of Murphy's men had positioned themselves near the back door. Eli set Clara down behind a large crate and drew his gun. "Stay here. No matter what happens. If I don't come back, you run to your mama, understand?" Clara grabbed his sleeve. "Don't leave me. Please." The plea cut through him like a knife, bringing back memories of his own daughter's final moments. But this time would be different. This time, he wouldn't fail. "I'm not leaving you," he promised. "I'm just going to clear the way home." The gunfight was brief, but intense. Eli's years of experience showed as he outmaneuvered Murphy's men, using the warehouse's layout to his advantage. When the smoke cleared, both men were down, and the way was clear. But as Eli returned for Clara, Murphy himself appeared, gun drawn and face twisted with rage. "You always were too stubborn for your own good," Murphy snarled. "Should have died with your family 5 years ago." "Maybe," Eli replied, positioning himself between Murphy and Clara. "But I didn't, and now you're going to pay for what you did to them." "Am I?" Murphy smiled coldly. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. Even if you kill me, my men will finish what I started." "Your men are dead or running," Eli said calmly. "It's just you and me now, Murphy, the way it should have been 5 years ago." Murphy's confidence wavered slightly. "You're bluffing. Only one way to find out." The standoff stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Murphy made his move, raising his gun toward Clara. Eli was faster, his shot taking Murphy in the chest and spinning him around. But Murphy wasn't finished. With his dying breath, he triggered a hidden explosive device, one designed to bring down the entire warehouse and eliminate all evidence of his crimes. "Eli!" Evelyn's voice called from the front of the building as the structure began to shake and groan. Eli scooped up Clara and ran, dodging falling beams and collapsing walls as the warehouse came apart around them. Behind them, Murphy's body was crushed under tons of debris, finally paying the price for his crimes. They burst through the front entrance just as the building collapsed completely, sending up a cloud of dust and smoke that could be seen for miles. Evelyn rushed to them, tears streaming down her face as she gathered Clara into her arms. "Mama!" Clara sobbed, clinging to her mother. "I knew you'd come. I knew you'd bring the cowboy." Eli stood apart, watching the reunion with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Justice had been served, Clara was safe, and the evidence in Evelyn's possession would ensure that Murphy's crimes were exposed. But it couldn't bring back his own family or erase the guilt that still haunted him. "Mr. Walker," Clara called out, breaking away from her mother to approach him. "Thank you for saving me." Eli knelt down to her level, his voice gentle. "You saved yourself, little one. You were brave when it mattered most." Clara studied his face with the serious expression that only children could manage. "Are you still sad about your little girl?" The question caught him off guard. "How did you—" "I heard the bad man talking. He said you lost someone too." Clara reached out and took his hand. "My papa died, and it made me and Mama very sad. But Mama says that people we love never really leave us. They stay in our hearts forever." Eli felt tears he'd been holding back for 5 years finally begin to flow. Your mama's a very wise woman. Will you stay with us? Clara asked. Mama says we're going to start over somewhere new. You could come too. Eli looked at Evelyn, seeing the hope in her eyes, the possibility of a future he'd never dared to imagine. For 5 years, he'd been running from his past, drowning his guilt in alcohol and self-pity. But maybe it was time to stop running and start living again. I'd like that, he said finally. I'd like that very much. As the sun rose over Dodge City, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, 3 survivors stood together in the dust and debris of their ordeal. They'd lost much: innocence, security, the illusion that the world was always safe and fair. But they'd gained something too: the knowledge that even in the darkest times, hope could survive, love could endure, and redemption was always possible for those brave enough to seek it. Eli Walker had finally come home. Not to a place, but to the possibility of family, of purpose, of a future worth fighting for. And as Clara slipped her small hand into his, he knew that sometimes the greatest victories came not from the battles we won, but from the courage to keep fighting when all seemed lost. The loner cowboy was loner no more. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.